All right, today we're going to talk about Adhi-Yoga, which is the yoga of command. Adi means being the leader. So this is a yoga for leadership. Let's see what he says. Greetings, everybody. Yeah. Let's see. So I'll switch it over. We'll take a look at this definition. He says Somya in English. He says the command yoga, the Adi Yoga, benefics in the 7th, 6th, or 8th from the moon or ascendant. They indicate respectively an enforcer, advisor, and landholder. They indicate respectively an enforcer, an advisor, comma. Probably they respectively indicate. Too many commas, right? They respectively indicate an enforcer, advisor, and landholder endowed with opulence, longevity, and intellect. So here's a note. This means that a benefic in the 6th indicates an enforcer, in the 7th, an advisor, and in the 8th, a landholder. The other three qualities, opulence, longevity, and intellect, could be correlated to the three benefics, Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury, and can also be correlated to the houses. 8th, preventing death, 6th, preventing illness, and 7th, preventing dullness and unawareness. So let me explain this a bit. It's a bit confusing, but once you sort it out, it's quite cool. So, Somyar Indurjuna Shadrandra Sangstais. Tadvalagnat Sangstair Vadhi-Yoga. So, the important word there is va, which means or, not and. It's not cha, but it's va. Neta mantri bhupati syat kramena khyatha shriman dirgajivi manasvi. Okay, so it means Somyar are the benefics, Indra-Duna from the moon, Indu, Duna the 7th, Shad the 6th, Randra the 8th house, Sangstais, situated. Tadvalagnat, or also the same situation from the ascendant. Samstai, they're all situated. Then Va, that's or, and Adhi-Yoga, that's called Adhi-Yoga. And then right away he gives the effect. Usually he gives two yogas together in a group. So it takes one whole verse to define, and then another verse to explain the effects, or another two. But this time he doesn't have any other one to group with this. So he goes right to the effect, and he says, Neta mantri bhupati syat kramena. Kramena means respectively, or in a certain order. So what he's saying is the words Neta mantri bhupati, they follow the same order as the words Duna Shadrandra. So Neta means, I'll get into what it means first, but let me just explain this correlation. Neta, let's say it means boss. Mantri means guide. And Bhupati means lord. So boss, guide, and lord are these three key words. Let's just say in English, simple words for these three terms. Those are in the same order as Juna Shadrandra. Juna means the 7th, where the sun sets. Shad literally means 6. Randra means where you can't see, which is the 8th. So 7, 6, 8 is the order. But it's actually doesn't make any sense that way. It's a little confusing. 7, 6, 8 is the order that he puts it in, but the order that makes sense for Neta Mantri Bhupati is 6, 7, 8. Okay. Stepped on my own toes explaining that, but at least I showed you some of the confusion that could be there. The other part that's confusing is Va. So does he mean... Well, let me finish it up. Khyata. This person will be famous as either another set of 3 words: Shriman, Dirgajivi, or Manasvi. Shriman means basically opulent, wealthy. Dirgajivi means long life or enduring, very enduring. And Manasvi means very thoughtful or intelligent. So you can correlate. There's 3 benefics: Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter. Maybe Mercury, maybe he's not even talking about Mercury. So he's not particularly clear. And that's the thing about these books. They're not taught in an age where you don't expect the author to be right there to explain it to you. This is the challenge of reading old books. They were written in a time when things were very local. So it would be like getting a person's notebook and studying it with the person when you got the book. Because the author probably was in your town or your city, or available to ask questions. But these days, people talk to each other very, very far away from each other, etc. So we don't really write a book expecting that we'll be the ones explaining the book. So we are more careful to make sure the book explains itself. But in the old days, they weren't. They actually expected the book would be in somebody's hands that knew what the book meant. So we don't know for sure if he wants us to include Mercury as a benefic, since mainly the benefics are Venus and Jupiter. There's a reason why most people jump to the conclusion that he does, because you got groups of 3. This whole yoga is about groups of 3. 7th house, 6th house, 8th house, right? Dhyana Shadrandra. 6, 7, 8. Then you have 3 effects: boss, guide, lord, or wealth, longevity, and thoughtfulness. But that's the other misconception. Let me show you that one. We'll get this. This is a little bit complicated to understand, but we'll get it. Look, I have a different lagna finally. It's a Taurus lagna. So let's put the 3 benefics on the table. It's not the sun. It's not the moon. Those are not considered benefic. It's not Mars. That's considered malefic. Let's say it's Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus. Okay. Those are our 3 benefics. Now he says, let's put them, if he says in a certain position relative to the moon or the ascendant. So let's just say the moon is here to make it simple to begin with. Okay? Because then the moon and the ascendant are in the same place. So what most people will assume is that this means something like this. Something like this. We generally assume that this means Adhi-Yoga. To have the 3 houses opposite from the moon or ascendant occupied by the 3 benefics. But there's actually nothing in the wording of it that indicates that's what he means. In fact, it is worded more that he doesn't actually mean that. And it makes a lot more sense that he doesn't mean that. Because because of the word kramat. That's the one that's confusing. So kramat means sequentially or respectively. So what he's saying is that each one of these houses would respectively produce an effect if occupied by a benefic. And I also want to explain why that is. And by understanding why, you could understand how to really read it and see cases of charts that technically have it, but actually don't have the effect. But charts that maybe don't technically have it, but do have the effect. When you understand the why behind the yoga, then that is a lot easier to make sense out of. But so to show you what this really means is, it's not that only this is an Adhi-Yoga. This is also an Adhi-Yoga. Okay? If you have a benefic in the 7th, 6th, or 8th house, it's an Adhi-Yoga. And it can be from the moon or from the ascendant. Now you're saying that's not so rare. Okay, but let me show you how to actually read it. So then if you have this one, if you have the moon here, and you have Venus here, then you have two Adhi-Yogas. Because Jupiter is in the 8th from the ascendant, and Venus is in the 8th from the moon. So this could also be two Adhi-Yogas, right? You could also do it this way. So I like this one because here you get Venus exalted, but this could also be anyway, let's just teach the basics. All right, this could be two Adhi-Yogas. This could, right? We don't necessarily have to have Mercury even in the picture anymore, because generally they don't. When a classical book says a benefic, they mean Venus and Jupiter, and when they say a malefic, they mean Mars and Saturn. But the fact that it says manasvi, let me switch back to this. Let's read this again now. Get back on track. Getting back to this. So I'll read it you again what he says now. Maybe it makes sense. The Adhi-Yoga forms if benefics are in the 7th, 6th, or 8th. Va means or. Benefics are in the 7th, 6th, or 8th from the moon or from the ascendant. So, I mean, initially, this is the thought process that went on in my head. Initially, I thought it would mean this, for example. This benefics in the 6th, 7th, and 8th from the moon, or this benefics in 6th, 7th, and 8th from the ascendant, not this. Not where you have one set from the ascendant and one set from the moon. But he just has the word or, and he doesn't have the word and anywhere in here. So it's not like any of this is a clustered group or anything. So this would actually be 2 or possibly 3 Adhi-Yogas. In the correct way to read it. Any questions about that? About just the mechanics of what the yoga basically is? Yes, Spacebug, and I'll talk about that too. I want to talk about why. Happy Equinox, Brandon. Is it the day of? It's the day after, but basically the same thing, I guess. Sorry, Seema. That is a bad day. I'm in the loop. Quick recap? Yeah, that happens naturally because I recap everything all the time. Nah. Okay. So he says they respectively indicate an enforcer, an advisor, and a landholder. So now, does that make sense? If you have a let me explain why. Let me explain why first, and then what the effect is. So here's why. I actually want to do something else here. Well, all right, here's why. Let's get the moon off the page for a second. Do you know about aspects? Do you know what an aspect is? An aspect is the effect of a glance. It's effective of looking at something else. For example, this happens a lot with my daughter. She doesn't want me to look at her when she's doing something. Like if she's playing with her computer or something or whatever, or she's building a origami something. She gets like nervous if I'm looking at her. So there's actually pressure or effect exerted from people's glances. If you look at somebody, it affects them, right? So that concept is the basis for the theory of aspects, which is that a planet can influence other things that it can see. It doesn't have to be there. It doesn't have to physically touch it. It can, if it sees it, it also can influence it. And that's why they're called aspects. Aspects means a way of looking at something. In Sanskrit, they're called drishti, the glances. So this whole yoga is about the importance of aspects on the ascendant and the moon. This is how you really have to parse this yoga and boil it down. That the aspects that occur to the ascendant and the moon are super, super important for understanding the chart. And he's going to give some very cool information about how to read aspects. Therefore, if understanding the way that he says to read the yoga is basically understanding the way that he says to read aspects. But before we go there, I just want to mention one significant thing about aspects. You can't see everything equally clear. Like for a human, you can't see things very well that are too far on the sides. And you can't at all see things which are behind you. For a spider, it's different, right? For different animals, they have different fields of vision, fish, etc. Similarly, planets have like a field of vision. Things that they can see very clearly, things that they get a little blurry, and things that they're blind to. And every planet has basically the same vision, but the further planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, they have a better view. So they tend to see more. All right, so one thing that every planet has in common is that it can see what's right in front of its face. Every planet can see perfectly something that's directly in front of it, which means 180 degrees opposite from it, or the seventh house from it. The shorthand way of saying 180 degrees is to say 7 rashis. Because, yeah, all right. Now, lost my train. So this yoga really is the effect of aspects on the ascendant or moon. Therefore, you really want to see. Okay, that's why he's saying 6, 7, or 8. Because if you get 6, 7, or 8, then you're close to having that thing 180 degrees in front of you. The 7th house is exactly 180 degrees away. The 6th is pretty close, and the 8th is pretty close. Not to mention that the 6th is 180. Another way to look at it is this. Now, okay, sorry, sometimes it's difficult to speak at the same speed that the brain goes at. If you know the pattern, it's pretty important. Is this mic like totally overloading? If you know the pattern. If you know the pattern of vision for the planets, it's helpful. Um, the pattern is every planet can see right in front of its face, but every planet cannot see what is at 150 degrees from it. Nobody can see that spot. That's called a blind spot. Everybody has some view. Every planet can see something at the fifth place, which is 120 degrees. Everybody can see very clearly on the seventh place, is 180. Every planet can see pretty strong, very clearly on the eighth spot, which is 210 degrees, and pretty strong on the ninth. But nobody can see into that one weird blind spot that's like a pole in front of them, which is the sixth. So that knowing that, you might question, why would the eighth house form this yoga? If this particular yoga that's on screen right now, with Venus over here, why would that count as an Adhi-Yoga then? Because it's the ascendant is in the sixth from it. Venus in Sagittarius is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The ascendant is the sixth house from it. So why is that? It's not following your idea that this is all about the aspects to the ascendant. So it actually, the planet that's in the 12th or the 6th or the 8th will then have aspect on the 2nd or the 12th, which are brackets to the first and important. So two ways to think about that. The first reason why I started talking about this is you actually want to see how much influence do they have on the ascendant. So let me give you an example. I'm going to have to do this. Thought I was going to have to do this, and in fact, I'm going to have to do it. Good. Let's say the ascendant is 29. And let's say Venus is also 29, but in the 8th house. Then it's not really going to be effective. It's not really going to. You'll find that here's a person who has this yoga and doesn't have the effects. But if Venus is at 1 degree and the ascendant is at 29 degrees, then the ascendant is almost exactly right in front of Venus's face. It's 181 degrees, 182 degrees away. So you see, this is why they include the 8th house. Because when you have it depends on where the ascendant is in its sign. If it's towards the later half of the sign, and if the planet in the 8th is towards the front half of it, it will be very, very strong effect on the ascendant. That's one way. That's one way to see it. The other way to see it. Let's go back to where it was. That the other way to see it is, well, if the ascendant is 29 degrees, or whatever it is, let's make it any number so you don't get confused. Let's say 14. If the ascendant is 14 degrees, then 14 degrees of every darn house is now the cusp, which means the essential point in every house. So planets giving vision, when they give aspect, they don't just give it to other planets, they give it to these points. If they can see these points, for example, if they can see the ascendant, if they can see the cusp of a house, then they can exert their influence on that house. And that's how you figure out aspects to houses, by how much influence there is to the cusp of it. So in this situation, Venus has a very strong influence on the 2nd house, which is important. In this yoga, if this is the case, if this is what he's thinking about, like, we don't have him here to ask him, but then it's saying it's the ascendant, the 2nd, and the 12th are very important to how commanding or present the person is. Adhi-Yoga means very present. Adhi means very forceful or manifest or strong or commanding or present. The native is. So anything in the first house will make deals with how present you are, how visible you are, how concrete you are, how strong you are. So that whole first quadrant, the quadrant of the sky, the eastern quadrant of the sky, is important for that. 12, 2, and 1. So if you're in the 6th house, then you're going to aspect the 12th. If you're in the 7th house, you're going to aspect the 1st. If you're in the 8th house, you're going to aspect the 2nd. I happen to think, from looking at this yoga in charts, like in real practice, I happen to think that this is actually what it is. This is the reason that so what you want to do to see how strongly yoga really manifests is how well, again, basically the same thing. This one, if Venus is at 1 degree, it's not going to be as strong of an Adhi-Yoga because it's out of alignment with the cusp that it's influencing. The yoga is about how the planet affects the houses in the east. Okay, so Venus at 14 degrees in the 8th house is a much stronger Adhi-Yoga than Venus at, say, 25 or something, 28. Relative to the ascendant. I hope you understand that. I'm a little tired of explaining it, but it definitely explained it right. So if you don't understand it, you got to rewind. And then to make it a little bit more complicated, remember everything we just said about the ascendant, you can say about the moon. So just put it on the pretty screen. If you have the moon here, if you have the moon here, let's say 6 degrees. Anything you want. Let's just pretend it's at 6 degrees. Then if you have Jupiter over here, oh my God, it's debilitated. Okay, just so that that's not annoying. Here, this is actually good. If you have Jupiter over here at 6 degrees and the moon over there at 6 degrees, that's also a very strong Adhi-Yoga because the moon functions as a secondary ascendant. The moon is the next ascendant after the ascendant for acting as a focal point for the house. It doesn't function as a secondary ascendant. It functions as a secondary lagna or focal point. So in this chart, you're getting a lot of Adhi-Yoga in this example chart that's on the screen because you have both benefics giving Adhi-Yoga to the first house, to the ascendant, and also to the moon. However, Venus's Adhi-Yoga is kind of weak because it's out of alignment. It's at 28 degrees when the alignment point is 14. And Jupiter's Adhi-Yoga is very, very strong because it's in perfect alignment. All right, let me just check and see if you have a question about that. There's not an orb limit. It's not orbs. Orbs is a Persian approximation. I believe Persians developed it, but it was a non-Indian approximation of the system. The system doesn't work on orbs. The system works on gradients. So, for example, every planet can see 100% clearly on the 180 degrees away from it, but can see at zero clarity to 150, 6th house. So in other words, in shorthand terms, every planet is blind on the 6th Rashi, and every planet has full vision on the 7th Rashi. So this orb thing is actually a gradient. There's a gradient between being blind and being perfectly visioned, and it's just a linear gradient. So if you're halfway between 150, 6 and 7, then you'll be half seen. Capiche? It makes sense? If you're 3/4 of the way to 180, then you're 3/4 of the way view. So then every planet has, let's say every planet except Mars. Every planet has a full vision on 7th Rashi point, 180 degrees, and every planet except Mars has 3/4 vision to the 8th marker. So the in between of that is a gradient. There's not an orb, like if it's inside the certain orb means like 4 degrees or 8 degrees on either side is the aspect, and if it's 9 degrees on either side, it's not the aspect anymore. The original system, as preserved in India, is a gradient between the key points. All right. So Jonathan's asking, so the benefit of having a benefic in the 6th is the fact that it is aspecting the 12th and or the 1st. Precisely, Watson. Now the audio you say is too soft. I thought it was like overloaded before. Good morning. Can the moon participate in this yoga if counted from the ascendant? No. The moon is not benefic. Does this yoga result in Mahadasha of the participating planets or lifelong? Every yoga is the same. Everything in the chart is the same. It has a lifelong effect, but it becomes more pronounced during the dashas or transits. That's the theory. The practices means that when dashas involving the yoga planets line up or synchronize, for example, you have a yoga caused by, this one is Jupiter and the moon. So, and then you have your moon dasha Jupiter subcycle. But that's when you expect this will come out. Simplified, it's still simplified, right? But you want to see the other planets in the dashas are not antagonistic to it, and there's not an antagonistic transit. And that the yoga itself is strong in the chart. Don't malefics deliver better results in the 6th house than benefics? Yes, they do, but it's not the Adhi-Yoga. Adhi-Yoga is a different thing. We don't generally want to see a benefic in the 6th house, but it will form this Adhi-Yoga. This is why he says also, he mentioned it first of all from the moon. Maybe. Happy friggin' New Year for that. All right. Samurai. In the text, it named first the moon, then the ascendant. You think it implies like a more intense effect from the moon? Oh, yeah, that's what I just said, right? I didn't know I was answering that question, but I was answering that question. You'll see people say Chandradi Yoga or Lagnadi Yoga sometimes to differentiate the two. Yeah, maybe he wants to primarily see it come from the moon. I personally think that it's the other way around. It's just my personal guess and feeling as a practicing astrologer. All right. Let's now talk about the effects and how to make sense of them now that we understand the mechanics. So he says, Somyar Indo Duna Shadrandra Sangstais Tadva Lagnat Samstair Vadi Yoga. That's the benefics in the 7th, 6th, or 8th from the moon or ascendant makes Adi Yoga. Then he says, Neta Mantri Bhupati Syat Karmena. And respectively, it produces Neta Mantri or Bhupati, which means boss, guide, or lord. So I got here, they respectively indicate an enforcer, an advisor, and a landholder. And then Kyati Shriman, who is endowed with or famous for being opulent, Dirgajivi or Manasvi, long-lived and intelligent or thoughtful. So the note, this means that a benefic in the sixth indicates an enforcer. Because that's consonant with the nature of the sixth. The nature of the sixth is tough. A benefic in the seventh is an advisor, a mantri. And the benefic in the eighth is bhupati, very wealthy. They have a landholding. So it has to do with the axis. When it's in the sixth, it will be on axis with the 12th. When it's in the eighth, it's on axis with the second. It's on axis with the second. When it's in seventh, it's on axis with the first. So the eighth house, it gives a lot of wealth and landholding. When it's in the sixth house, it gives a lot of power and command as like a general, a boss, a manager, a policeman, somebody that gives orders and people obey. And then the seventh, it's somebody who communicates well and advises and is intelligent. This is very interesting stuff about Adhi-Yoga that I haven't seen it explained anywhere else before. I just heard Adhi-Yoga. You got to have benefic Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter in the 6th, 7th, and 8th, and it makes you a king. Not a whole lot of detail there. And also, to be frank, a completely useless yoga because it comes up in 0.1% of the charts, if that's the definition. But this definition, the way that we actually sorted out what he's saying, happens quite a bit. So you'll be always very often dealing with this principle, but won't often happen in a very strong way. If you want to have a laugh, you can think about my chart. My chart has the ascendant at a late degree of Capricorn. I have Jupiter in Libra and the moon in the 6th. So that's not making Jupiter's not making Adhi-Yoga with anybody. I have Venus in Virgo. So also that's not making Adhi-Yoga with anybody. That's 9th from ascendant and 4th from moon. But I have Mercury in Leo. So that's in the 8th. And I have Mercury at a late degree in Leo. So I have a Adhi-Yoga with Mercury from the 8th house. That's kind of funnily obvious, accurate. So then the final three things that he says is this thing about being opulent, long-lived, or thoughtful. So how do you correlate that? Excuse me. The itchy nose. How do you correlate that? You can correlate it to, it seems to me, like I am motivated to correlate this to the three benefics because Shriman and Manasvi seem basically like you're talking about Venus and Mercury. But then Dirgajivi isn't too compelling for Jupiter, except that Jupiter is reproduction and recreation, so it generates life. You know, it's growth and generation. So it can be thought of that way. Like if the Adhi-Yoga is being formed by Mercury, then expect it to involve intelligence or Manasvi. So if you have a Mercury forming the Adhi-Yoga from the 8th house, then it's the leadership is all about the intelligence operating in the 8th house. This is really how I would walk out of the class. The knowledge that I would carry out of the class about how to use the yoga, it's like that. But there's another way that you can think about it, which makes sense, perhaps more sense. You can also correlate these other three things also to the houses. So if you're Shriman, which means wealth, that would be from the effect of the sixth, a benefic in the sixth. Because six has to do with poverty, and it's gonna prevent poverty. If you are talking about Dirgajivi, long life, that's very compelling for the eighth house. Just like Shriman is very compelling to think it has to do with Venus, Dirgajivi is very compelling that it must have to do with the eighth house. So long life will come if the Adhi-Yoga is from the eighth house. At Manasvi, it's in the seventh house, which is unawareness, like, or just Duna, which means clouding or sunset. So the benefic there will prevent that. So in other words, the way I wrote it is these three qualities, opulence, longevity, intellect, can also be correlated to the houses. The eighth prevents death, so it gives longevity. The sixth prevents illness, so it gives Shriman. It shouldn't be illness. I should have poverty. The sixth is about debt, so it gives wealth. And the seventh prevents dullness or unawareness. It's probably all of these things. Like my case, Mercury in the eighth house, forming strong Raja Yoga, you get the effect of leadership. Adhi Yoga, the basic effect is Adhi, to become commanding or to have a good command. Right? You see this, to have a good command, it might mean that you're a commander, which is Neta. It might mean that you have command of a subject, which is Mantri. Or it might mean that you have command of some territory, which is Bhupati. If it's sixth house Adhi Yoga, then it's probably command as a leader. If it's seventh house Adhi Yoga, then it's probably command of a subject, Mantri. If it's eighth house, then it's probably command of territory as a lord. And then if it's by Jupiter, Venus, or Mercury, it has a different flavor. So if it's Mercury, then it's probably intellect. And Manasvi GV, all that stuff. Or if it's eighth house, then it's intellect, something like that. But at least you now have the tools to understand what he's talking about with Adhi Yoga, and you can work on it and see after several lifetimes what it really means. The basic stuff, the completely certain stuff about what he means about Adhi Yoga is things which influence the ascendant or the moon or the surrounding houses have a huge impact on how strongly you can make yourself present and forceful. That's the basic idea. So then the one more statement he has. Adhi-yogo bhavo naresh vamra stira sampat bahubandhu poshaka amana ripava parajata chiramayur labate prasidhatam. Command yoga indicates a leader with steady wealth, supporting many friends and family, who triumphs over opposition and has a long, successful life. So that's the base. Regardless of whatever planet's forming it or whatever house it's formed in, the basic effect of it is a leader type. And what kind of a leader? A leader who has steady resources and who therefore supports many people, triumphs over oppositions, and has a long, successful life. Sthira sampat means they have steady resources. Bahubandhu poshaka means they use those resources to support a lot of people. That's why you're called a leader friend. That's what it means. You don't have a leadership if you don't have bahubandhu. many followers. And then Amna Ripuva Parajita, he will destroy obstacles. He or she will destroy obstacles. Chiramayu means Dirgajivi. They'll have a long life. So long life also can mean persistence. Persistence and patience. And Prasidatam, it's successful. That's the basic effect of Adhi-Yoga. And then the details of it will give command and assets via the planet, a particular planet, and the particular house or houses that's from. That is what Mantreshwar had to teach us today about Adhi-Yoga. Any questions? What about Sun in the Eighth? It's not an Adhi-Yoga. The basic definition is benefics. Why you must ask such a question? Because you have Sun in the Eighth and you want me to talk about Sun in the Eighth, but that's not what the topic is today. Moon in the 7th and Jupiter in 8th, debilitated in Capricorn. Moon in 7th, baby, we don't care. Jupiter in the 8th, we care. It's Adhi-Yoga. Now you want to say, what is the degree of the Jupiter? What is the degree of the ascendant? To assess how strong the Adhi-Yoga is. And then the fact that Jupiter is in Capricorn, debilitated, is something you have to also realize is a part of the recipe. Sanyukta is a good question. What is the effect of having a malefic in conjunction with any of the planets? This is the one thing, Sanyukta Ji, which I feel is a little bit unexplained so far. I talked a lot about the word va, that the or is very important in this statement. Somya Indur Dyuna Shadrandra Sang Stais. The other one is stiti. The word basically is stitis, which just means have them situated there. Somya. Somyair. Anybody, any Sanskrit person immediately know what the case is on Somya? I need to look this up because this will seal the deal in a second. I need to look up this table. Why are you doing this to me? 1 second. This one's too slow for me. To this table. Perfect. So Somyais, right? Somyai, Somyai, Yao Yao Ye, Yam Yao Yang, Ina Yap Yam Yai. Okay, it's plural. So it's in the plural case, not the dual case. So this solves the question of does he mean Mercury or not? He does mean Mercury. He does want to include Mercury in this. Otherwise, he would have said Somyabhyam, not Somyai. Okay, back to statements. So back to the question. What was the question? What's the effect of having a malefic? So this word then samstai, the word stiti, you want to have the benefics, the somyai, have to be stiti in Dhyuna Sharanarandra. They have to be situated in 7, 6, or 8. But why does he say samstai and not just sta? You could just say sta. Somyai indur Dhyuna Shadrandra sta. That would be fine. But he says samstai, which gives a lot more emphasis. It means like something like really there. So it's a feeling like we need to understand this word. Why didn't he just say there? Why did he say really there? And this pertains to your question. You want to have the benefic there, and that's it. You don't want to have anybody else there. So to make this clear, I'll show you what I mean. Let's get simple again. Simple is nice. Excuse me. All right. So here we're going to say Jupiter is doing Adhi-Yoga for the ascendant, because Jupiter is a benefic and it's in the 8th house. Now, this reason why it says samsta means this will not be Adhi-Yoga. You get it? This is samsta. This is sta. And I believe that it would be any planet other than Venus and Mercury would spoil the samsta. So like this is also, I would doubt that this is a Adhi-Yoga. The moon would probably be okay because the moon is another focal point for it. So the moon, Venus, and Mercury would be the ones that would be allowed to be with Jupiter. That's how I would reply to your question. Ruchira, you could have just... Anyway, it's good for me to look it up, right? Thank you, Ruchira. Rahu Ketu, no, it doesn't. We don't care. Ruchira, feel free, like, in the future, if you see that I'm saying something like I was saying earlier, where it's just like, he's not, you know, does he want to include Mercury or not? If you notice something like, hey, that's third plural, that's plural, that's enough to answer the question, really. That's plural, then you can just let me know, because that would answer the question. What are the questions we got? Yeah, that's it, right? Anything else? Okay, thank you for joining me. I like these names. Dawn Woodhouse. That name looks so familiar. Ruchira, Sanyukta, everybody, Bash. In the loop. I always want to say I'm in the loop. I'm in the loop. But then you should have put IMIN. I'm in the loop. And Samurai, Spacebug, Jonathan, and all you guys, Dr. Singal, all the regulars, Vela Sima, Mrs. Snail. We got a nice, like, recurring Sangha people. So I'll see you in 2 days. We'll get more done with the Prithu story in the Bhagavatam. Thank you.